So I think we stopped with, the next one would have been 2 Kings 2:11. I've had more fun looking at this Old Testament stuff. It makes me want to really get back and study the Old Testament. I was looking through Jeannie's Bible, because I always look there for sermons and stuff. She doesn't have hardly anything in the Old Testament. She spent her whole life studying the New Testament, which she did a good job of. Let's look at 2 Kings 2:11. Actually, we'll pick up some before and after it. The company of the prophets, verse 5, the company of the prophets of Jericho went up to Elisha, and asked him, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied, "but don't speak of it." Because Elisha was Elijah's student, okay? Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to Jordan." But Elisha replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. 50 men of the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his coat, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. You know, if the Bible were special effects, you'd think, you've done that before a couple times. Anyhow, when they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I can do for you before I'm taken up from you." "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha said. "You've asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. Yet if you see me, when I'm taken from you, it will be yours, otherwise not." As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, "My father, the chariot and horsemen of Israel." And Elisha saw him no more, and he took hold of his own clothes and tore them apart. He kind of had two miracles in that story. First one was the parting of the water. And you know, there's a lot behind that. It's the faith to walk out on that dry land, trusting it's going to stay dry. And then the second miracle was what? Chariot and horses of fire. I always wondered if that's where the movie title came from, Chariots of Fire. But, and you say, well, gosh, was it really a chariot of fire? Were there really horses of fire? Again, it's one of those miracles that I don't know, and I can't explain. But something miraculously happened that made an impression on Elisha and took Elijah away. It mentioned a big group of people. At that time, when you were a prophet, you developed a school, and there'd be lots of men, just men that we know of, that would come and try to learn from you. And Elisha had been with him for quite a while, and he asked for a double portion. Phrase he used. I want to let me inherit a double portion of your spirit. What is that talking about, you reckon? I think it's talking about he wanted to be able to understand people and understand the word even more than Elijah, because he was going to run into some really rough times in the coming years. So he needed to be extra pumped up, extra knowledgeable. Let's look at 2 Kings 5:10. Who's the main character in that one, if you read any of it? It's Naaman. Back when Lee Cruz was coming to Bible study, he found this little play called Splish Splash, I Was Taking a Bath. It was about the Naaman story. It was so cute. We never did get to do it. So you've got Naaman, and he's a leader, he's a ruler, leading a large group of men, and he gets this awful, horrible disease, leprosy. And in those days, and for a long time, if you had leprosy, no one would come near him. And so he finds out about Elisha from one of his servants who'd been taken into captivity. When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, they do that a lot when they're upset. have the man come to me, and he will know there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and chariot. He wanted Elisha to come to him. Elisha said, no, you want me, come to me. And stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of leprosy. Then he talks about the rivers at his house, his area, that are so much cleaner. You know, we see these pretty pictures of the River Jordan. Where do you often see a picture of the River Jordan in a church? In a baptistry. You know, they have that picture in the back, and it's always pretty. River Jordan's nasty. It's nasty. He says, can I do it in a cleaner place? And this same little girl comes to him and says, if he'd asked you to do something hard, some great thing, verse 13, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Again, this is one of those miracles I would have liked to have seen. You've got Naaman, who's got leprosy. Take psoriasis and make it 10 times worse. And he finally gets over himself and walks out into this river. And he goes down once and he comes up, still got it. Twice, 3 times, 4 times. By now I'm sure he's really irritated. 5 times, 6 times. But the 7th time he comes up and he's totally clean. It's kind of hard to believe, isn't it? I think it is. It's kind of out there. So there are a couple of miracles in this one. They all have a little extra meaning. One, of course, was that Naaman was healed. What do you think another miracle type thing could have been? Some of it was that the girl knew about Elisha, and she'd been taken in captivity, but she still told him to go get Elisha. There's also the miracle of Naaman being willing to, if you will, quote unquote, get over himself. To be able to just say, you know, he wanted to be healed so much. And again, this is one of those healings where nobody got touched, you know. He expected, because that's what prophets did when they were going to heal you, they come out and, you know, earnest angel hit you and touch you some way or another. And he thought he expected to do that. What does it say to us about how God chooses to heal things in our lives? It's not always the way we think it will be, or the way we think it should be. So the miracle happens when we're willing to accept. And I'm not just talking about physical healing. Healing of heart, healing of emotions, healing of friendships. Sometimes God works in strange ways to bring that about. Don't ever be afraid to get in that muddy river if that's what God calls you to. Somebody said last week, you know, miracles happening all around us. I think they are. We don't even realize it. We don't even catch it. Let's look at the next one, Daniel. Now that's over a few books. Past Jeremiah, past Ezekiel. Psalm, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, then you get to Daniel. These are stories that you may have studied or heard in Sunday school when you were a kid. The first one is in Daniel chapter 3. We had a coal furnace when I was a kid, and this story scared me to pieces. So Daniel and his friends have been taken into captivity, into Babylon. They're in a different country, different language, different foods, different things. And they're in the first group, because the first group they took to Babylon were the pretty people, the well-educated and good-looking people. So you get an idea what Daniel looked like. He was with the good-looking group. And he's there in captivity, but he makes a name for himself in various ways. One of the things was he refused to eat the food because it wasn't kosher. And that got the king riled up. So he finally says, enough of this. I want to show these boys a lesson. Chapter 3. Sorry, I lost my Chapter 3, we're starting at verse 8. This time some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, forever you have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, pipes, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. But whoever does not fall down and worship be thrown into a blazing furnace. Now, what do you think Daniel's reaction is going to be to that? He's not going to bow to an idol. But there are some Jews whom you have set over affairs in the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Is that a true thing? Did they refuse to worship that? Yeah. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, Is it true that you do not serve my God or worship the image of gold I've set up? Nor when you hear the sound of all those instruments, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you don't worship it, you'll be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? He had a lot of respect for Daniel. They'd already put them in charge of things. They'd given them positions of leadership. And I think some of his rage was because he had invested in those boys, and they disobeyed him. 19, then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie them up and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took them, and these 3 men, firmly tied, and fell into the blazing furnace. You know, when you hear about some of these industrial fires and how things, even not right in the fire, will melt, or the fires in Australia, the fires in California, that level of heat, that the people who threw them in were killed. Then Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw in the fire? They replied, Certainly, O king. He said, Look, I see 4 men walking around the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. They came out of the fire. They saw the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. How in the world could that have happened? Even the most intense fire retardant outfits can sometimes at least get smoky. So the miracle is that they were saved. But who's this 4th guy? Who's this 4th guy? A lot of people think that was an early appearance of Jesus, or some part of God that was there with them. Can I prove that? No. But somehow or another, and I've often wondered, was there really a 4th person there, or was it so hot and so fiery that he lost count of who was moving around? But he declared that it was a son of a God. Son of a God. The fact that they survived was one thing, but the fact that they didn't even smell like smoke. I was thinking about you all talking about when you're in Vegas and all the smoke around you and how easy it was to pick that up. But they weren't scorched at all. What do you think the local people thought about that? What would you think if you were among the group watching this?
Shocked, surprised, scared.
I think I'd be real hesitant to do anything to Daniel. You know, Nebuchadnezzar was kind of a slow learner, though. Because if you turn over to chapter 6, verse 16, I added a few in here. Chapter 6, verse 16 is all. Actually, we'll start at verse 1. We've got a new king now called Darius. And he reorganized his kingdom, put a bunch of governors over, vice regents. You know, they had a good job of delegating. These guys knew how to delegate. Verse 10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened to God, opened to the sky. The decree was that you could not worship Jehovah God. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God just as he had done before, by the open window. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asked God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or man except you would be thrown in the lion's den? The king said, the decree stands in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So then they say, well, let me tell you about that good boy Daniel that you want to put in charge of everything. Daniel, who's one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. The king heard this. He was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Now he's in a position where he's made this decree, and if he lets Daniel off, what's that going to say to the rest of the people? That he's not as strong a king as they thought he was. Verse 15, then the men went as a group to the king and said to him, remember, O king, according to the law of Medes and Persians, no decree can be repealed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into a lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. I know the story of the fiery furnace must have gotten around, because he even brings up the idea that God might rescue him. The stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own ring and the rings of the nobles. His situation might not be changed. The king goes to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. Of course he couldn't sleep. He knew this was a good guy. He knew this was a guy who had a God that watched out for him. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? That shows a little bit of faith, doesn't it? That he even, wouldn't you just want to like peek in and see what happened, as opposed to actually trusting he's going to answer? Daniel answered, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They've not hurt me, because I was found innocent in God's sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king. The king was overjoyed, gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den, and when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted his God. The miracle is that the lion didn't eat him up. Not even a nip, not even a bite. And Daniel attributed it to the angel keeping the lion's mouth shut. In our world today, none of us are going to get thrown into a lion pit, thank you. Some people fall in those things, when they're not where they're supposed to be. But what would be comparable to being put in the lion's pit today for Christians, or for any of us? Have you ever tossed yourself into a situation you don't know how to get out of it? Or you've left yourself open and vulnerable to people who don't like you or who will hurt you? And I've been in situations where I've literally seen people who wanted to, quote unquote, tell me off, stop. And one interesting, this wasn't telling me off, but I went to see Joyce Myers one time in Winston-Salem, I think. And it was a bunch of us from the Norfolk Church, and we had heard that she sometimes went off on LGBT folks. So I was a little hesitant to go. We're sitting there, and she was preaching, and she got to one of those places where you know that homosexuality is going to be the next thing on the list. And I'm sitting there praying, God, just please, don't, because a lot of these people are new Christians, don't let her say that to my people. And she got to that point, and she literally went, and went on to something else. And to me, that lion got its mouth stopped right at that moment. If somebody told me that I hadn't seen it, I probably wouldn't believe it, but I'll never forget it, because she just talks and talks and talks and talks and talks. And she stopped dead in her tracks. It'd be interesting for you to read the rest of the Daniel story and see what all things happen there. Let's look at just a couple more. How about Exodus chapter 7? You go all the way back to the front again. There are two miracles in Exodus chapter 7, well, more than two. One is the people had been taken by plague, and they were dying. And of course, they always say, why'd you bring us out here to die? Chapter 7, verse 8, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, this is before they got to that place, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. Do you remember that scene in the Ten Commandments? They've got all these snakes out, and he says something about, and he throws his snake down, and Aaron's snake ate all the other snakes. You know, again, a miracle. And what was the miracle? Just a trick to turn a staff into a snake? I think he was trying to show Pharaoh one more time what can happen. And then the next couple of chapters, all the way through 12, tell us about the plagues, which were miracles in themselves. You know, we think about the fact that the flies and the frogs and the lice and the hail, and you know, some of that fell on the Hebrew children. Some of that went through. But what was the one plague that did not touch any of them? Again, a cool scene in the Ten Commandments movie. The last plague was to be the death of who? The firstborn. In chapter 12. The firstborn child. And Moses told them, because God told him to take a lamb that had been slaughtered and put blood on their doorposts. And when they're there, the angel of death would not stop. All around Egypt, other children, including the Pharaoh's son, were killed, but they were spared. Now, there's some really interesting stuff about that that's come out. Because the Pharaoh's family was special, they got to sleep in special places, and the youngest favored one, you know, the heir to the throne, would often sleep on the ground floor, so he didn't have to climb up and all that. But then there's a case of some of the plagues they've gone through and everything, gas coming up that they say it could have killed them. You know, these are just things they throw out to think about. And so the firstborn was killed, but not the firstborn of the Hebrews. And that was sort of what turned Pharaoh around and helped him see. You know, sometimes it has to hit home. Sometimes it has to hit home close to us before we realize how important a particular thing is. When I moved back here from California, I got kind of upset because I met so many people who had not dealt with anyone who had AIDS. And having been immersed in it out there, I would say, well, where are you? Where are the guys? Because nobody would even say anything about having AIDS. And I had to realize that when it becomes personal, you understand a whole lot more. Cancer. Cancer's been around forever. When I was a kid, you didn't go visit somebody with cancer because you might catch it. Anybody remember hearing that when they were younger? And it's one thing to know that people out there have cancer until it's you or a close family member. Same thing with people being beat up for being LGBT. It's a nice thing on the internet until you know somebody who's been through that. So once the Pharaoh saw for himself what can happen, he turned things around then a little bit. And go through some time and just read about the plagues. Yeah, they're kind of gross and nasty. But it's interesting if you take the time to see them build one on the other on the other. Let's look at a real familiar one in Jonah. Jonah's on back past Daniel. Past Hosea. Did I overshoot it? really went through a long period of time when I didn't bother with the Bible at all. And I realized I used to be able to call these things out left and right, but I wasn't able to. So I decided I had to retrain my mind. It's on past Obadiah. I had to retrain my mind, and the way I did that was I went through each book of the Bible. And like today is January 19th, I'd read the first chapter, 19th verse. Did it make a lot of sense out of context? Not always. But it trained me what the next book was, And you already know the story of Jonah. Nelson, you may have heard some of Jerry Ann's sermons about Jonah. Jonah had this problem. God had called him to go to Nineveh. Okay, people got called to go to lots of places. But he didn't want to go to Nineveh and help them be saved because they were bad people. They deserved to die. And God kept getting at him to go, and so he says, bye. And he runs off. You know, you can run from God, but God's going to catch you. Sooner or later, God's going to catch you. He runs off. He gets on a boat. And people had a lot of superstitions. They ran into a bad storm, and their immediate assumption was somebody's done something bad. Still happens today. Something happens to you who messed up. Who brought that on us? So he tells them, I'm running from God. You better throw me over, you're all going to die. And they did. They threw him over. And what happened then? A big fish, doesn't say whale, a big fish swallowed him. And I've seen all kinds of studies about whether somebody could have survived in a fish's stomach or not. But the scripture tells us that after those days, those 3 days, what happened?
The fish threw him up.
The fish burnt. Yeah, the fish burnt. Now, again, the funny part of this is when he gets burped out in Nineveh, I've often wondered how they could convert so quickly. Because Nineveh was a huge city. I heard it was like about the size of Chicago. And before he could even get halfway through the city, people are falling down and worshiping God, which made him mad. Think about how he looked after being in the acidy stomach of the whale for 3 days. I get this picture of stuff in his hair, being totally white, his clothes. You know, if somebody comes through like that telling you repent, God's going to kill you if you don't, you'd listen up a lot quicker. So the miracle, twofold miracle again, was that he survived the whale, big fish. And the other miracle is the city turned to God. Do you remember how Jonah reacted to that? This is kind of an interesting part of the story. Chapter 4, but Jonah was greatly displeased and became angry. He prayed to the Lord, "Oh Lord, is this not what I said when I was going home? That's why I was so quick to flee to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live." But the Lord replied, "Have you any right to be angry?" There's a whole other story about the planting curses and all that. But it's interesting, he had followed God, he had done what God asked him to do, and then he got mad because people responded. We can't quite fit ourselves into the xenophobia of that day. We can't quite fit it in that he could dislike a whole city, a whole country of people that much that he would be mad when God healed them, or took care of them, or didn't destroy them. But we do that sometimes. Especially if we pray for somebody and they seem to get the answer but don't follow through on it. Or if they seem to get an answer different than what we had hoped they'd get. So often we try to jam our God into our expectations. So read the rest of that chapter 4 sometime. I'm going to look at just two more. Numbers chapter 20. Remember, that's back toward the front. I don't ever mean to insult anybody when I say that kind of thing, but I've had people looking. I'll say, go right, go left. Numbers chapter 20. Starting with verse 7. God spoke to Moses, take the staff, assemble the community, you and your brother Aaron, speak to that rock that's right in front of them, and it will give water. You will bring water out of the rock for them. Congregation and cattle will both drink. Now this had already happened once. And that time he told Moses to speak and to strike the rock. This time he said just speak to it. Moses took the staff away from God's presence as commanded. He and Aaron rounded up the whole congregation in front of the rock. Moses spoke, listen, rebels, do we have to bring water out of this rock for you? They were complaining again. With that, Moses raised his arm and slammed his staff against the rock, once, twice. Water poured out, congregation and cattle drank. And God said to Moses and Aaron, because you didn't trust me, didn't treat me with holy reverence in front of the people, you two aren't going to lead this company into the land that I'm giving them. So the miracle was that he hit the rock and water came out. The important thing was the people got water. So why did God get irritated? He disobeyed. He disobeyed. I'm wondering if Moses was just so irate with the people. Because it says he hit it twice. He didn't just do it once, he hit it twice. If he was so frustrated that just took over. And I'm not sure he even realized he had disobeyed God, to be honest with you. And it was a little harsh punishment because God said, you don't need to go in the promised land. And if you read on ways, you'll see that Moses got to the mount just before the promised land. And God allowed him to go up and see over it. And he died. Can you go to Israel and find Moses' grave now? You know, they have churches and all kinds of things on different sites. Scripture says nobody knew where he was buried. And I think for that very reason, they didn't want to make him into a mini god. They wanted to make sure they went in under new leadership. How can that affect us today? What kind of thing did God ask us to do? Not that God's going to kill us or whatever, but what kind of thing can we do that oversteps what God's asked? Sometimes we can try to make sure somebody gets to church and sits and listens against their will. Now, if they just come one time to make you shut up, that's one thing. But you know, some people can just really put pressure on. And my experience has been, if somebody puts that much pressure on you, you may not be open to hearing. Now, yes, you may hear the word and be immediately turned on to it all, and that'd be great. But a lot of times, that's not what happens. It's more important, like I've told you before, a friend of mine told me to go to MCC for 3 years before I ever went. And he didn't even go to the church. So it's a way of finding that way of gentling somebody in. If you tell me I have to do something, my heels dig in almost before I think it through. Prove to me. Tell me why I have to do it. Tell me why I can't do it. So these are some of the miracles from the Old Testament. And there are a bunch more, but these are enough for them. I want you to see this because we tend to think of miracles and we immediately think of Jesus. And God's been in the miracle business all through the time. Now I've been looking and figuring and studying for the last week what we do next. And I'm going to leave it up to you all. I'm going to post this online too. I have a sheet here that says Tuesday night Bible study. What do you want to study? Look over this list of suggested areas. Check the topic you would be interested in studying. Bible characters, current topics, Christian development areas, that's like prayer and stuff. Books of the Bible, other topics. And I'm going to ask you all to bring them back on Sunday. And when I put it online, I'm going to ask people to send me some suggestions. And we'll see what comes up. We did that one time way back. It was kind of interesting what come up first and second and third. So be thinking about it, because, you know, I know it's good to be here and listen to each other and be here with each other, and you don't quite go to sleep when I'm talking. I thought it might be good if you had some say in what we study next. Whatever you put down, we will eventually get to. Without saying it out loud, who's already had something pop in their mind? Anybody? Well, that's going to be a hard week till Sunday for you all. You know, you could always do the Bible dipping thing, where you hold the Bible and you just open it, see what book it is, what the topic is. That could be very interesting. Can you think of a time in your life when you saw or experienced a miracle? Yeah.
I guess I saw a miracle. I was driving down 81, I was following, there was a truck and a car, and then me. Every time I swung out the pass, the lady would come out. She'd go back in. I'd swing out the pass, she would come out, and I'd go back in. So this time I'm like, I don't care, I'm going. So I started out, she came over, ran me off the road, had a Volkswagen, which was a 5-speed. And I thought I hit the brake, and the car just kept going fast. Stopped it again. Now, I don't know, you know, in a car with the 5-speed, you got a clutch and a brake. My foot was coming over to the clutch, and hitting the clutch. And when I got back in the road, this voice just said, if you would have hit the brake, you would have slid down that bank.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Those, you know, and those things happen. That kind of thing happens. You never know what miracle you've experienced and didn't know it.
Yeah, that's like Lisa said last week, you never know, just the small things.
Small things, or you know, you get delayed. I used to get
Exactly.
so irritated if I didn't get to leave on time for something. And I've learned now to not be so uptight about it, because there could be a wreck down the road that I'm avoiding.
That happens
That's
a lot when we're traveling.
That's what we always say, we're like, you know, we're running a little behind, but, you know, we could have been in an accident, and then 15 minutes later or so, there's an accident, so, yeah.
For some of us, the fact that we're in church is a miracle to some other people, you know? Babies are a great miracle. I look at little CJ, you know, we've watched him grow up from, he was probably 3 weeks old when they brought him in the first time. We've watched Trips go from being this tall to being this tall, you know, and those are miracles. I think there's a miracle sometimes when we're praying and the answer may not show up right in front of us, but we get an understanding that it's okay, I have a woman who used to be in my church in Charlotte. 4 years ago, she finally got a diagnosis of several places of cancer. And the doctor said, go home and get your affairs in order, you've got 6 weeks. And she said, I'm standing on God's word, I'm not ready to die. God's not ready for me. And she got in touch with Cancer Center of America, I think that's what it's called. And 4 years later, she posted today that she'd been through another operation and she's starting a different chemo. And when she feels good, she works at the local Waffle House in her town. And I think I'd like to see that doctor and say, the awful long 6 weeks. Awful long 6 weeks. And if I believe that if she had listened to him and just given up and gotten her affairs in order, she probably would have died in that period of time. Any last minute prayer requests or praises? Pray for people that are coming to our food pantry. You know, I don't get to hear a lot of the stories, but sometimes I just hear enough from my office. And people aren't coming in just to fill their cabinets. Come in because they don't have any food, or they don't have food for their children. And I just can't hardly imagine that. But I'm glad we have that for them here. Loving God, thank you for showing us that miracles come in many different ways. Miracles come in ways we don't even take the time to see as a miracle. As you be with all of us as we go home in the cold. Be with people who will be coming in Thursday. Bless this room, anoint this room, so that when they walk in, they'll feel your presence and your love. And they'll know that the food comes from hearts of love. In your name we pray.